Good evening. Welcome to the City of Pinole Planning Commission. And we are tonight going to be receiving the housing element for discussion. And just if you would like to participate or if you have comments, you can watch live on channel 26. You can go to the city's website and live stream from there, or you can Zoom video conference. I'm going to zoom.us/join, and the ID is 865-0537-5301. If you wish to speak on the housing element, you are welcome to when we ask for comment. And we don't need to worry about appeals. Is there anything else before we call to order? I don't think so. So let's call this meeting to order, and please stand to honor the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag, America. Stand. What do you know?
Thank you. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Mr. Hannum, could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Menes. Here. Commissioner Benzuli is absent and he called and said that he wouldn't be able to attend. Commissioner Benuelos. We have not heard from Tim. Commissioner Current.
Here.
Vice Chair Martinez.
Here.
Chair Moriarty.
Present.
Yeah, the records show we do have a majority of 4 members, so we can take action on all items tonight.
Thank you very much. I'd also like it to be noted that Alex Mogg is not with us tonight, but we have Erica Gonzalez, who is representing the city attorney. So thank you for being with us, Erica. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
I do not see anyone online right now.
Okay, we'll give them a second. Okay, then let's go ahead and we will address the meeting minutes from the August 31st meeting. Do I have a motion to approve, or do we have anyone who has any comments before we do that?
I don't have any comments. I make a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting of August 31st, 2022.
We have a second.
I'll second it, Dave Current.
Okay. Mr. Hannum?
Commissioner Menes,
Yes.
Commissioner Current,
Yes.
Vice Chair Martinez,
Yes.
Chair Moriarty.
Yes.
Motion carried 4-0.
Okay. Then tonight we don't have any public hearings and no old business, and we will go straight to new business. So tonight we will receive a presentation on the status of the 2023-2031 housing element update and the first draft of the housing element. We will provide feedback that will be transmitted to the City Council for consideration at a later City Council meeting. There we go. That was the ghost one there. We'll be there in a and incorporate that draft housing element, which will be submitted to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for initial comments. So remember that this is part of an ongoing update. And I guess I'm trying to figure out if there's anything that we should do as far as public comments. We'll go to that after the presentation. So let's go ahead and go for it then. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to give a kind of a brief introduction. Of course, as the commission is aware, the city hired MBI or Michael Baker International to complete the housing element update, as well as our social justice element, as well as updates to the safety element. But tonight is just the housing element. We've been at this now for approximately, probably now about 4 or 5 months. We've had a number of community outreach engagements. We've had surveys. We've had public service or public hearings or on the project. And so tonight is just the ability for the commission to see the first draft, and basically tonight really focusing on our sites and our programs and policies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Weary from MBI and Emily Elliott, and let them at this point take over the meeting. So go ahead, Dan and Emily.
Great. Thanks, David. And good evening, Planning Commission and audience, if we have any. I'm Dan Weary from Michael Baker International, and I'll be going through about 30 slides with you tonight. Some of this you've seen before in our joint City Council planning commission workshop, so I won't belabor it too much. But as David mentioned, the focus tonight is kind of talk about the draft housing element, which hopefully you've had a chance to get acquainted with, and we can go over in more detail any questions you may have, and hopefully that will facilitate some development of any further refinements or ideas in terms of the housing programs that we've got laid out already. And that discussion may also facilitate some discussion with the public as well, or help them with the review. So with that, we'll kind of jump right in. I think, David, you're running the slide, so we can go next slide. This is just our team. So Lily's not able to be here with us tonight, but David and Justin are. And again, I'm Dan Weary, and Emily Elliott is here with me tonight, and representing the team here. So next couple of slides, again, as David mentioned, we're going to focus on the housing element tonight. And the purpose of the housing element is to ensure the availability and fair distribution of housing throughout the city. And that's housing for all. So all income levels, all life stages, all different sizes of families and household needs, including households with special needs, such as seniors, veterans, household with disabilities, or unsheltered or homeless. And a big part of this is to make sure that we're providing and meeting our regional housing needs, or housing needs assessment, RHNA, as it's assigned from the state down to the region, and from the region down to each and every city and county. And we'll go over that in a little bit more detail. Let's see, so the next slide, just quickly, what's in the housing element. There are 6 main chapters, and that starts with the review of accomplishments, and that's a bit of a look back at the current housing element, the 5th cycle housing element, which goes through January 31st, 2023. And that's when this new one will pick up and run for the next 8 years. And so we look at those programs and assess them and determine what's working, what's not, what could be modified, and then we carry those into our new housing programs. The next couple of chapters are the needs assessment. That's a lot of heavy data analysis to look at existing projecting housing needs. It's a lot of socioeconomic data. Then we look at our housing resources. That's primarily determining and developing an inventory of available sites with appropriate zoning, general plan designations, infrastructure, and a lack of constraints, such that we can meet our RHNA or our regional housing needs assessment over the next 8 years. The next chapter is constraints, and that's again looking primarily at the governmental or regulatory constraints, and looking for ways to streamline the process, remove unnecessary bureaucracy where possible, or look at other ways to provide a more streamlined or certain process. And then a new major chapter, it's not entirely new, but it's effectively become a huge section of the housing element, and that's the affirmatively furthering fair housing. And it's assessment and looking at conditions and making a commitment to meaningful actions to improve fair housing. And that encompasses a lot, but basically trying to overcome past patterns of land use that led to concentrations of poverty or race or ethnicity, and other forms of segregation, and make sure that all households have a fair shot at getting the adequate housing that they need. And then lastly is the goals and policies and the implementation plan. And again, it kind of is the bookend. So we start off with a review of accomplishments for the 5th cycle, and we'll end with new programs and policies and actions for this 6th cycle, which will run from 2031 or 2023 through 2031. So next slide. Quickly, our RHNA obligations is provide sufficient land. The city is not obligated to construct housing. We have a RHNA for the city of Pinole of 500 units, and that's broken across 4 income categories, and we'll slide on that in a minute. And one of the things, again, we provide through this process an identification of suitable sites to meet that RHNA requirement. And I just wanted to clarify, one of the things that this plan does is, again, identify those sites, but creating or identifying those sites does not add any additional requirements or constraints on a property owner that may be identified. Rather, it provides value and options. But some people think, oh, well, if I get identified as a site, I have to develop only as whatever it was designated in the housing element. That's not the case. So the next thing is public outreach. Emily, I don't know if you want to take a minute and just kind of run through what we've done.
Yeah.
Great, and I'll take a breather and drink some
Yeah,
more.
great. Advance the slide one, please. Great. So the city conducted a pretty comprehensive public outreach campaign. Kind of the base camp for the public outreach campaign is the website that was created for the work plan, and that's landuseplanning4pinole.com. And for anyone watching, if you want to read the housing element draft, it's available there in a PDF link on the website, and it will remain up there beyond November 17th, but that is like the 30-day comment period. But the draft will remain up there until it changes, and then a new draft will take its place. Early on, we conducted a community survey, and it was provided in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. We also conducted stakeholder focus groups with any kind of group in the community that has some sort of stake or interest in housing and environmental justice and safety. We also conducted community workshops and study sessions. These are recorded and they're hosted on the website. And then you may have seen banners and social media posts being posted around town or on Instagram and Facebook. And then we've also worked with the Pinole Community Television Group to place our advertisements there. And then same with the city's bi-weekly administrative report. Finally, we do have an email list. So if anyone has any interest in receiving future updates on the housing element, you can shoot us an email at contact@landuseplanningforpinole.com to be added to the email list.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. So the next slide, this is just showing what I mentioned before, our regional housing needs allocations, or RHNA. This just kind of breaks it down a little more detail. So it shows the, in this case, 5 categories, including extremely low, but often we group the extremely low and very low together. And so it shows the number of units that we're looking and have been assigned for each income category. And then just shows roughly what those 4-person household income would have in terms of the fit within those income levels and what they could afford in terms of rent or a purchase price. And again, our RHNA is for 500 units. And then if we look at the next slide, what we show here is kind of our initial strategy, and this represents what's in the draft housing element. So we have our RHNA across the top there with 500 units in our distribution between the very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And then we add a 20% buffer onto that. And that's really what we call the no net loss buffer. Because the city is required at all times through the housing element period, 8 years, to maintain adequate sites to cover your RHNA until you've actually provided that housing. And but sometimes what happens is sites that are identified, say for 100 units, might get developed for 50 units. Well, we would have a net loss of 50 units. And rather than having to rezone or to add new sites, we just provide a buffer there. So it's a little excess capacity. So you don't have to always update your RHNA list. If we do drop below even that 20% buffer, then we'll need to add additional sites in there. And we have some, that we've identified that weren't as good as the ones we've already identified. So there are some extras. If they got really bad, you potentially have to rezone. You've only got 6 months to rezone. So we really want to avoid that, and that's why we put that buffer in there. The good thing I just want to point out is the third row, which is pending projects. And then we've included we've also got ADUs in there, but the pending projects, you've already got, out of your 500 unit total RHNA, you've already got 400 units proposed and pending. So they're coming online shortly and soon. And you can see the distribution. We've got a very good distribution as well. We've already exceeded our RENA for the low income category. That was a 69 unit RENA. We've already got 150 coming online. We've already exceeded the above moderate RENA of 223 units. We've got, I'm sorry, we've got, I thought we had already exceeded that one. No, we've got 163, so we're almost there. I'll show you the next slide where we have exceeded that. Then we're projecting accessory dwelling units. You've got really very low accessory dwelling unit production. So we've got very modest projections there, just 24 over the 8 years. We think you can do a lot better on that. And then our RENA sites, these are the sites that we've identified to meet any shortfall in any of these categories. So you see that we've got some there and they're very low, moderate, and above moderate. We don't have any proposed in the low category because we've already exceeded that number. You see the total capacity, and then the bottom line is just doing the math to see, you know, how we are versus our target of the RENA plus a 20% buffer. So on the next slide, looks very much the same, just says revisions at the top. And if you look at the pending projects, there's a couple of numbers in green there. And that's because on October 18th, the redevelopment of the Kmart site it was approved. And we're going to be able to include that into our pending sites. So that adds 223 units, which happens to be the same number of units for our entire above moderate RENA. A few of those units, I think 27, 13 very low and 14 low, I believe, or 27 of those units, 13 and 14 for very low and low are designated for below market rate units. So that's very nice. So these numbers kind of reflect that. And the reason I show this here is we really have a lot more in our current list than we need. So we're probably going to reduce some of those sites that we don't need. We'll keep the Kmart site because it's such a great site. And we'll probably take some of the other sites and put them kind of in reserve. And on the next slide, you can kind of see our sites inventory. So you've got them kind of by color, so all the bright colors. And that's just so they pop up on these maps and you can see them. And we've kind of broken them out by the income categories, lower, above, moderate. Mixed is, again, projects typically that have a range of things like the Kmart site, which has very low, low, and market rate units. And then the crosshatched sites, like the one that says recently approved, you see in the red box there, maybe hard to see, but kind of a purple site with a crosshatch. That's that Kmart site. So it's been redeveloped. So we just added that on, and we're going to make some adjustments before we submit to HCD for their review, just to refine those counts a little bit. So with that, that kind of summarizes our RENA needs and our sites and how we're going to meet those. The second major component to, and the most important piece probably, is the housing programs and the overall plan. And so that's what I kind of like to go over now. We can go to the next slide. We'll go through these. So hopefully you had a chance to look at these a little bit, but the housing program is really composed of 3 sections, and it's the goals, the policies, and then actions, measurable outcomes, metrics, and timelines. And where possible, we identify responsible parties and funding. And that's really what HCD is looking for. They're really trying to get into the details now. And they really consider this housing element kind of a contract between the city, the public, and the state. So they're looking for things where they can really check and measure. So that's a heavy emphasis on objective metrics there. So the next slide just shows how we've organized. We've got 22 proposed programs in this housing element, and they're organized into these kind of 6 major categories, which is really housing production to meet our RENA, which we just talked about, housing to meet the needs of all income levels and special needs groups, removal of government constraints, that's the streamlining I was talking about. The 4th category is conserve, preserve, and improve the housing stock. So once we build the housing, we want to keep it around as long as we can or forever and keep it affordable. And then the 5th is affirmatively furthering fair housing. And 6th is housing education and community outreach. And so we've got programs in each of those categories, which we can go through. And the idea here is I'm going to kind of give you an overview, and then we can come back to any of these later and have some more discussion. We're particularly interested if you guys have some recommendations, some insights, maybe how we can make the 22 programs that we've got stronger or better, or perhaps add some programs. Those are the kind of comments that we'd like to report to City Council in a few weeks, or about 3 weeks, and then incorporated possible revisions before we submit to HCD. So this first one here is housing production programs. And again, first one is just meeting asset sites and inventory. Publicize and promote residential sites inventory. So one thing is, once we have these sites, we want to let the developers and property owners know about it, and try to encourage that development. The third is outreach and technical assistance to applicants. So making the approval process easy. And then facilitate ADU production. As I mentioned, you've got only a few units per year. I think that's a real good opportunity. Most cities are putting a lot of emphasis on that because it's a nice way to integrate housing in kind of an unseen way, and it really provides a lot of support for homeowners and small households. So the next one is really just kind of highlight a couple of examples here under ADU production, just some of the things that we're proposing here. So we need to update the ADU ordinance. And that's really to meet state requirements. There's been a number of changes. Seems like, every few months there's a new law. And so we need to keep up with that. There's ADU tracking. So we'll be tracking the production numbers. The idea is to create a fast track program, provide some incentives and some priorities to get these things done. And one of the other incentives is to provide an amnesty program, because we understand that there's probably a bunch of accessory dwelling units that haven't gone through the approval process. They're just kind of out there, and we'd like to bring them into the system, make sure that they've been inspected, they're up to code and safe and secure, and make it easy for them. So an amnesty program to facilitate that process. And then looking at other ways to incentivize those will be a variety of financial incentives. So fee waivers is one thing, is the ability to waive the fees, particularly where homeowners might agree to make these affordable units or rent to at a rate that will be affordable to a low-income household. So that's just one example there. We'll go through these and then we can come back to any of these. There's probably another 10 or so slides. So be prepared, I guess. Housing to meet the income levels of all special needs groups. And again, we've got programs in there, and these numbers here represent the actual program numbers in the housing element. So program number 5 is incentives for mixed use developments. And I think we've got another slide on that. Development of housing successors, low income housing asset funds. So we have funds that were left over from redevelopment. And so that's now the successor funds. And but we want to have more direction for how to use those funds, particularly for low and extremely low household units. And then we've got affordable housing incentives. There's a number of different incentives that we've talked about, some of which we've mentioned here already with the accessory dwelling units, ways to facilitate, waive fees, particularly where developers are going to make these units affordable to below market rate units. And then housing for extremely low income households. We've talked about some extra incentives, particularly to meet those targeted needs. And that might be additional density bonuses on top of what the state requires. And similarly, the same thing for senior housing incentives. And then some home sharing and tenant matching. That's a nice service, is to help facilitate maybe homeowners with an accessory unit or an extra room in their home find an appropriate tenant. So there's been some really good examples of that. So again, a couple of examples here on the next slide is housing for extremely low income households. And a couple of things that we're proposing here is what I just mentioned, the providing a policy program, how to use those successor funds, and then fee waiver for building permits for qualified households. And that might include, making improvements for universal design, help keep seniors in their homes longer. Reducing parking standards for extremely low income households. They tend not to have cars, can't afford a car. Why are we requiring, parking at the same level as a, single family home, multiple cars. And then working with developers to provide kind of an annual housing workshop to, again, streamline the process, find ways to do better, make sure everybody's got the adequate information, and so everybody's kind of operating as efficiently as possible. So in the next slide, these are going to be, you're going to see some repeats here. Senior housing incentives, we're using some of the same tools. So reduced parking, fee waiver reductions, might be some enhanced rebate incentives to undertake energy efficient improvements. Again, making it not only keeping people in their home, but saving energy and funds that might spend on energy. So again, making it more affordable in that way. And then again, promote the home matching and shared housing program that I just mentioned. It's a neat tool. The next category we've got is constraint removal programs. And kind of four main programs here, a series of zoning amendments, and those are primarily to meet state requirements, keep up with all the new laws. Incorporating objective design standards. So we remove all the subjective language, which is basically quickly being removed from all the codes and process. The state's made it very clear that just takes time and money, and we need to be very clear and certain. So we need objective standards that anybody can understand. Do I meet it or not? Fee evaluation and publicization, just making sure everybody understands what the fees are, make them published on the website, make them clear to everybody, and then permit streamlining. I think we've got a couple of examples. One is a series of zoning amendments here. And again, most of these are to comply with recent state housing law. So we've got some changes to the emergency shelter ordinances that are required. We've got to modify the standards for low barrier navigation centers. They need to be allowed wherever multifamily uses are allowed, basically. We need to, this is a constraint particular to the Pinole code, where it has a different standard, whether you're on a permanent foundation or whether it's a manufactured home or not. And you're not allowed to treat a manufactured home different than a stick-built home on site, provided it's on a permanent foundation. So that's just a little clarification of the code. And then updates regarding SB 9 standards, and update the ordinance to comply with the state density bonus law. And the main change there was that the maximum density bonus, I should say the minimum maximum, maybe it's the maximum minimum, was increased from 35% bonus to 50% bonus. And it's on a sliding scale. So it also, as you provide more and lower income households, you get a greater bonus. Okay, so the next category is the conserve, preserve, and improve the housing stock. We're looking at programs that provide rehabilitation assistance, encouraging affordable housing developers to acquire and rehab properties. Again, keep existing housing stock, will bring existing housing stock into the affordable housing market. And then looking at the below market rate regulations and conversions, making sure there's appropriate protections there, particularly so tenants aren't displaced. The next category here is affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we've got a number of different programs, really kind of looking at any areas that might be somewhat disadvantaged. And that's where these place-based improvements come in. So the state is particularly looking at making sure that areas, particularly older areas that may have all the bells and whistles of some of the newer development, get their improvements as well. So sometimes it's sidewalks, street trees, it could be paving, could be street lights, could be access to parks, and trying to provide equity there between typically some of the older areas of the city and the newer areas of the city. And then fair housing resources and services, that's currently contracted through county. And so there's a couple programs on that. And then again, displacement prevention and housing mobility. So again, that really are some of the programs there to make sure that people are able to find and access suitable housing. And I think we've got an example or two. So program 19, fair housing resources and services. So again, there are service providers now. We want to make sure people have access and are aware of them. So sometimes that's the first barrier, is they just don't know who to call. So we're going to advertise, collaborate with the housing provider. We're going to have some localized workshops, at least one per year in Pinole, so that local Pinole residents will have the best access to this. Then again, there's kind of education, make sure that tenants and landlords and homeowners understand their rights and responsibilities. And again, publishing these things, not only publishing them on the website, but getting them out into the public realm. So out the counter, at the library, the senior center, trying to take the information to the people who need it. And that can even include at events. So often when you've got different events, we've got a pop-up booth with information. This information will be available there as well. Okay, almost done. Housing education and community outreach. So a lot of this is some of the examples I just mentioned, where how do we get this information out? So a lot of these programs kind of talk to each other and use each other. And the education kind of cuts across most of these things, because most of this, all of these programs can benefit through daylighting, making sure that people are aware of it. And so getting it on the website, getting it out to people in a variety of different ways. So that's kind of program 21 is housing resource education. And then specifically, we've got programs to promote knowledge, understanding of the accessory dwelling unit and junior accessory dwelling unit and SB 9 split lots and units. So we've got some programs for that. And oh my gosh, I'm going to skip this last slide. I think I've been talking too long, but if you guys want to go back to any of these, we're happy to do that. But that's kind of the summary of and highlights of the 22 programs that we've got in there. We can talk about any and all of them. But really the next steps at this point are to get your comments. And again, we're going to be collecting public comments through November 17th. That's the official 30-day comment period for the public. We will continue to take comments throughout this whole process. At the end of that day on November 17th, we're going to collect them all. That starts another clock of 10 business days where we assess all those comments and then make any appropriate changes before we submit to HCD. And HCD has up to 90 days for their review. So we really want to get into HCD as soon as possible, start that 90-day process. And while they're reviewing it, we can continue to work and refine and polish these ideas. So some of the thoughts that you may have tonight, comments that we get from the public, comments from the city council workshop on the 15th. We'll all roll those in and try to get those out to HCD as soon as possible after the close of that 30-day public comment period. Again, we've got a minimum 10 days, 10 business days. So really add 2 weeks, it'll be end of November or December 1st or so before we can submit to HCD. So HCD review would start at the end of November. It's going to run for typically 90 days. They take their full 90 days typically and usually get back to us on the 88th or 89th day. We'll get a letter. They're going to give us lots of comments. Hopefully not too many that are too difficult. And they should like your plan because you've done very, very well with your production. As I mentioned, you're over 80% of your 8-year RENA requirement. So that's great. They should be very happy with that. Then so we're going to get HCD comments. And in February and March, we'll be looking at making revisions in response to those comments. We'll send those back out for public review. There's a 7-day minimum public review period. Sorry, I've been talking to the wrong slide, haven't I? Sorry, David. So there will be a second round almost for sure. So we'll get HCD comments. We'll make revisions. We'll submit for, we'll circulate that for public review again for 7 days minimum. And then it goes back to HCD. And this time, instead of 90 days, they have a 60-day max to review it. We should be getting those comments back in late March or April. And again, we'll make some final revisions. And hopefully at that point, we're pretty confident we'll be able to come back to you for official hearings on the adoption of the final draft housing element. And then make that submittal, get it adopted and make that submittal end of April or May. So that's our schedule looking forward. And at this point, we're happy to entertain any comments or questions you've got. And then we can go back to any of the slides you like. So again, our goal is really just entertain any thoughts you have, any questions you've got on the housing element. We'll do our best to answer them. And if you got any suggestions, particularly on the programs and or sites, we'd like to hear those. And we'll be aggregating all these with the public review comments. And then again, the city council comments and making those revisions. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Weary and Ms. Elliott, for that presentation. I did have a question before we go to the commissioners. Do we want to address the programs and the sites at the same time? Or do we just want to talk about the programs first from this presentation and then address the sites after that?
I would think we would address the song. I think we would address the programs first and then the sites, and then right now, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me too. So for the commissioners, let's just at this moment then address the programs and such that we've had from this presentation. And also if one commissioner brings it up, let's not repeat it and bring it up, over again. Frankie, as you're sick, I'm going to ask if you would prefer to go first or later.
I'll pass and
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's what I thought. Great. Then let's go ahead and start with Commissioner Current. If you have any questions or comments regarding the programs.
Yes, actually, I have some comments about, I do. First of all, before I forget it, I just want to go to the draft that we had on page 94. There's fees about for a single family variance. You have on the last chart there, you have $1,1650. So I think there's an error there. So I just wanted to point that out before I forget about it. I'm just saying, wow, I think that that this is really a great report, a great analysis. And I know that in my 16 years of being on the planning, almost 16 years of being on the planning commission, I'm always love to see the housing element updates and general plan updates, because it really get the essence of what the city's all about. If anybody wants to know what Pinole's about, read these documents. A couple of questions I have about the programs is that, it's kind of challenging to address the needs of homeless people because there are people who shouldn't be out in the streets but are, and it's probably a problem that's a little bit too big for any city to handle. In fact, I was looking at a couple of years ago where, earlier this year, where it was stated by that San Francisco has a census of like 7,000 homeless people. And they have a budget of $700 million for that, which means it's almost like $100,000 per homeless person. And the reason why they're homeless is because you can't institutionalize them. So I think that's, to expect cities to address the homeless situation is beyond the powers that cities have. Something that I would like to see addressed in either the documents or in the programs are that there's an aspect of housing that's really not addressed, and that's the renting out of rooms. That I know that it's very common for someone that either has a multiple room apartment or single family housing to bring in unrelated roommates to help with the financing of the mortgages or the rent. And I think that's an aspect that really, I don't know how you can address it, whether it's possible to go back to the 2020 census information and find out how many unrelated people are living in housing that are supplementing rent. I don't know if that's possible to do or whether that's, something that we can just kind of mention that's kind of like a safety valve for homeless, providing housing opportunities for homeless people. Because I think that's something that's, like I said, is very common. I think that, I'd like your comments about how we can address that. The other comment I have is that when we had the RENA income levels, it was for a 4-person household. When you start getting to some of the extremely low individual or people, housing needs, they're usually like for 1 or 2 people, either one person or especially with seniors, it's one person or a couple. And I'm not really sure how that's reflected in the thought process of HCD and the allocation of housing, because it's if we provide housing that has like 1 bedroom, that's not adequate for a 4-person household, but yet it is adequate for a lot of the individuals or couples that need housing. And I don't know how that's, I'd like to know how that's addressed. And the other thoughts I have here, going kind of going through all my thoughts that I wrote down. Yeah, I talked about the need for housing. Of course, another thing is that in a recent economic downturn, especially with inflation and the inflation of both rents and mortgages, a lot of people who are otherwise capable working individuals have been priced out of the housing market. And a lot of these people don't need the aid that the chronic homeless people need, where they need programs and they need to have institutions happen. They just need a place to live. Some of these people are living in cars or RVs and just need a place to park. Others could be addressed by tiny houses, or I guess they're, as I saw in a document, I think they call them SROs, possible too, where sometimes I don't know if we want to consider, I'm kind of reluctant to do that, but do we want to have places where people can park their cars or RVs if they, but if they just can't afford housing? I'm just bringing it up. I'm not a big fan of that, but I think that's something that could be looked at. And he talked about the plan of updating ordinances. Oh, and another thing that I think that really should be addressed is teacher housing or school district housing. I know that in other districts around the Bay Area, in fact, I was reading one about Daly City, where the school board has built housing for teachers and school employees. And I think that's a solution that we should really be looking at. So I don't know whether we should be adding a program to where we would get with the school districts or private schools in our city, like St. Joseph, and finding out if there can be some kind of collaborative effort to provide housing for the educational staff. I'd kind of like to see a program in that. And what else do I got here? And the other thing I think that we should really consider, and this may be for the next step, but I'm going to bring it up and just so I don't forget about it. And that is that in our last general plan, we looked at housing overlays like in our shopping centers. You can look at the Kmart as an example of that, where a lot of our commercial and areas, brick and mortar stores are not able to find any retailers or to fill those. And I just kind of wonder whether we could supplement our housing inventory with having all of our retail areas be overlaid by housing, by some kind of, have a secondary thing where we would actually plan those, for housing. But that may come in the second section when we talk about the housing inventory. Those are my thoughts. I think you guys did a very good job. It's so easy to read this document, and I think it's a great thing. So with that, I will let one of the other commissioners go at it, unless you have some comments about my comments.
If you'd like to respond to any of those, at this point, go ahead, and then we can just, so we don't end up with a list of 100 things and then.
Yeah. I think maybe we go quickly, and then I want to make sure everybody gets a chance, but I think while we're on it. So, I heard, how do we deal with homelessness? It's difficult and maybe beyond, in many ways, what the city can do, but there are certain programs that we're looking at as I try to summarize. You mentioned a couple of things, the renting of rooms, and I think you asked, what can be done about that? I think, that is, particularly the very small units, whether it's an ADU or renting a room, somebody just needs a place and some shelter. So sometimes it's just a very, very small unit to take care of somebody so they don't end up on the street or in their car, or couch surfing. So the renting of rooms is allowed. And then we've got, as I mentioned, the accessory units or the junior accessory units are really kind of trying to do that. They're very small units. So that's something to be done. You mentioned a few other things that are kind of related. I'm skipping over a little bit, but you mentioned the SROs. It's something that most cities, or many, particularly big cities, had SRO hotels, and through the 70s and into the early mid 80s, almost all of those were eliminated. Unfortunately, that was really inexpensive housing, particularly for single room or single individual occupants. And so a combination of things, the loss of those have led to some of our housing needs. So that is something that, maybe an opportunity to allow an SRO. I'm not sure anybody's really building those anymore, unfortunately, but they do have, or did serve a real important need. You mentioned cars and RVs. Some cities have looked at safe parking programs, if they can find an appropriate spot so that people do have a place to go and feel secure, and where it is allowed to overnight in their car or their RV. So that could be a program that can be done. Many cities have that, and have done that. You mentioned the 4-person households. We just use that as a benchmark. It's not the best one, but just to get to the way that HCD looks at, we do look at, there's kind of these massive tables that kind of go through every type of housing unit and every type of income. So from very small all the way to, 4 and 5 person or more households. So we just use that one because that's one that people can often relate to. So that's just for demonstration purposes. It's not, we're not designing all our programs around 4-person households. A lot are intended to be for these smaller units. The teacher housing is a really good one. I think that's something that we've seen and have been encouraging, is particularly when we're looking at sites, looking at those institutional sites, schools, colleges, community colleges, religious facilities often have some land or extra parking areas that could be potential housing, particularly for staff. And so those are good opportunities. And there's a number of programs that can be done to encourage and promote that. The state has also made a few recent changes to state housing law to also facilitate that, particularly for religious institutions, where you can now use, without any problem, cut your parking in half for a religious facility, and then also use the remaining and use that half of that parking for affordable housing. And you can also share the remaining 50% of that parking. So they've kind of removed the constraint there, which often is parking requirements. So those are some kind of things that I think hopefully relate to some of the things that you mentioned, David. Forgive me if I missed something. Oh, housing overlay. That is a good program, and I believe we've got mixed use zoning. Some of the tweaks on those can be that we've seen other programs are allowing commercial to be used for up to 100% residential. And that can be sensitive, kind of depending on your areas. Sometimes you don't want to lose that commercial. In other areas, that might be appropriate. So that's something to probably look at more closely, where that might be suitable. You may not want to put that everywhere, but there may be areas where you'd want to allow, for instance, like the Kmart, it's gone from commercial to 100% residential on that portion of the overall development site. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and it really did. And there are a couple of thoughts that I really want to continue with our discussion as far as programs go. And some of those are that I think we need to have a program that that may formalize the room rental aspect of housing. And that is, should we develop some ordinances or residents or some oversight for the rental of rooms in single family homes or apartments, so that we can actually get some kind of a formal recognition for that being a solution for housing, and also the fact that we are regulating it so that there's some control over how houses are rented out. I also think that I do want to follow up on the teacher housing thing, as far as adding a program to get together with the school districts to explore that as a possibility. So those are probably the two things that I would like to to come out of the other end of this discussion, is to add those type of programs to what's proposed to the city council.
Great. Yeah, those
Commissioner
are good.
Menes, I'm sorry, Commissioner Menes, you had a comment right there.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to program number 10 on page 193, the home sharing and tenant matching. It seems like that might match up a bit with Commissioner Curran's comments about the city incentivizing room sharing and so on, even though it's a bit more house sharing.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's one of the ways to find somebody who could, fill an existing spot. We've got kind of a lot of empty nesters, and so sometimes people have more house than they need, and it's not being utilized. So if we can make better use of our existing rooms and households, that's great. And so just sometimes finding somebody that kind of fits could be a big help. And so that's what that program is about. It's not so much about regulating as much as facilitating it. But you're right. That's exactly why that's there.
Thank you, Raphael, for pointing that out.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Current, for your always thoughtful and experienced questions and thoughts on that. And thank you for those responses. Commissioner Menes?
All right, so to start with, I'm just going to be confining my comments to the program section right now. I've got lots of comments about and questions about the rest of the housing element, but I'll save that for later. So flipping back to. Let's see. I guess my question, I suppose, about program one, and I suppose this is probably something that's going to need to be more addressed later because it ties into the site allocations and some of the other sections of the document, but it says that the objective is to provide adequate size to accommodate the city's entire RHNA allocation of 500 units. I assume that includes the low income sites. And if I'm recalling the buffer amount for low income, I don't recall which page that was on exactly. It's pretty narrow, relatively speaking, compared to, say, low income, which, as you've noted in the slides already, is very well funded. And then let's see. Next question I have, no particular questions about program two. I had a question about program three, why it was targeting faith-based organizations in particular, but you mentioned the state law change to allow faith-based organizations in particular to convert their parking into housing. So that makes sense to target them for outreach in particular. On page 190, the housing to meet the needs of all income levels and special needs groups. I'm not sure whether that header should be going before program 5 or before program 6 like it is now. For program 6, it looks like the intent is to continue to require 40% to be affordable to very low income households. But in the RHNA charts, it seems to be implying that we basically want all of the low income affordable housing to be very low income, to effectively speaking, for that to shift up to a 100% requirement. But that doesn't seem to be indicated in any of the programs here. Without that, I'm worried that we'll just end up in similar situations like we ended up with the Kmart project, where you have a 50-50 split and you have a 223 unit project that produces 17 units of very low income housing. And when we need, around 100. Let's see next. For program 7 on page 191, I was curious as to just how exactly the city could expedite review on affordable housing projects to take half as much time as it ordinarily does. I was under the impression that the amount of time projects took was relatively fixed depending on the size of the project and the various entitlements and so on required to it. So how would the city be able to do some projects twice as fast as others? On page, let's see, do I have any questions about 8? No. For program number 10, I mentioned my comments on that earlier, but on page 194, I wanted to note the quantified objective says it just wants 10 total tenant matches completed throughout the entire planning period of 8 years. That's a really low number. We're planning to build about that many ADUs in that time period. So that alone should meet the 10 tenant matches and nothing else. If that was a per year number, maybe that would start to be getting close to being ambitious enough. But 10 tenant matches over 8 years seems like it's way too small a goal. Let's see, on page 196, program 14, permit streamlining. I want to focus in on this one for a bit because it directly impacts the planning commission. It says specifically the city will lower the approval authority of entitlements for all density bonus projects from city council to planning commission. So I assume that means the planning commission would become the final approving authority for density bonus projects, but I don't know how far that would go, because I know the council usually needs to, for example, expressly approve affordable housing covenants and things like that. So would that still continue to be the case for stuff like the Kmart project, for example? Would the planning commission have been the final approver for that for everything other than the affordable housing element, or would some of it still have gone to the council under program 14's adjustments? For page 199, program 18, place-based improvements. I noted that some of the comments that made earlier said that access to parks would be important for lower income communities, but I also noted that there were a few other things in the earlier programs. Let me see if I could find the specific ones that talked about basically removing the requirement for fees to subsidize housing in certain kinds of development. Let's see if I can find them. Okay. So for example, program 7, page 191, it says waiver of park impact fees for all deed restricted affordable units and above the 50% inclusionary units required. Program 8, evaluate fee deferrals or subsidies. And then I think there was at least one other area where park impact fees were explicitly noted as something that could/should be waived. Trying to see if I can find this specific program where it was mentioned. It may just have been number 7. I just noted that it was particularly highlighted that one of the ways that we're improving access to affordable housing is by waiving park impact fees. And then later on, we're talking about the importance of having access to parks when we're waiving the fees that would be used to develop those parks. So I'm not quite sure how that's all going to balance out. I also want to note that the geographic targeting is going to target place-based improvements to Western Pinole / environmental justice element impacting communities first. I think that's a good idea, and the particular details about why are probably something we should dig into more. We're talking about the rest of the housing element, because a lot of the necessary maps and charts for that are located in the affirmatively furthering fair housing subsection rather than the programs element proper. Let's see, on page 202, program 21 calls for provision of materials in multiple languages in coordination with program 19. That's great. We should always try to have multiple language access to materials, especially given the substantial quantity of households in our city. Even if it's not necessarily reflected in the surveys yet, but that again is going to be more something I'm commenting on later once we're out of the program section. And finally, on page 203 for program 22, it looks like there's a word missing. It says references to other educational and financial resources for homeowners building or incorporating ADUs on their, and then the sentence just ends. I assume it's supposed to end with the word property, but I'm not sure. And I think that's all my comments about programs.
Great, excellent. I'm so glad you guys are reading this in detail. It's really helpful. So I'll try to go quickly, go back, to make sure we capture them. I can see Emily's typing some notes as well. So I think your first question was about program 1. It sounded like you were noticing the discrepancy when we talked about the buffers, but it looked like the allocation of all our units was in the very low and none in the low. I think was that your question? And there is a reason for that, and that's because when we look at the proposed RENA sites, we've already met our RENA by more than doubled our RENA for the low income RENA. So we're not allocating any sites there, and so that's why you may not see a buffer or any units or sites allocated to that. So we're putting all. And the way it works is as long as we meet a certain density, that density covers both the very low, extremely low, very low, and low income households. That's the way the state looks at it. So as long as you achieve the minimum density, you can allocate those amongst those income categories. So where we have that, we've already met our low income, so we're applying that all toward the very low. So I think that might have been what you were noticing. One of your questions was trying to read my right. It was on page 191. We're asking, how's it gonna be done in half the time? The approvals. Again, that's a general goal here. And it may not be the overall time, but probably the processing time. What some cities have done is basically said, we're going to guarantee a turnaround. And so they set a goal and say, our normal review may be 20 or 30 days. You take an application in, deem it complete, then we're going to review and get your first cycle comments back. Some cities have actually gone and said, okay, we'll do that in half the time or 2/3 the time. We'll get it back to you in 20 days for the first cycle. And then the second cycle and every subsequent cycle, we'll do it in 15 days. And they make a commitment to do that. And they do that by elevating these priority projects to the top of the list. They get reviewed first before the other projects. So it's a commitment, requires resources to make sure you're able to do that. But that's the goal, is cut down the time if possible. So and maybe we change that time reduction. That may be too ambitious. And I know some of the other goals you thought maybe weren't ambitious enough, and I would agree. So the other one was, trying to provide the home matches, 10 over that period. Some of these we weren't sure, and we want to make sure that you're able to succeed in these. So you're not, if you overproduce, that's great. You just want to make sure you're going to be able to meet these goals. So we weren't sure, when this program would come into play and how many would even try to take advantage of it. So admittedly, that was a fairly low goal. It should be easy to do. So if we think it should be 10 per year or 5 per year, I think that's great, and take that under advisement.
Dan, on that topic too, HCD has told us that they would accept like a minimum goal and then also an aspirational goal. So kind of recognizing that we don't really know what is going to be the achievable outcome, but like say we're going to commit to 10, but we really want to say like we want 50, and that's what we're shooting for, but we're promising 10 to the state. Yeah.
And that's probably what that needs to do, is we really think we can do better, And I would say the same thing with the ADU production. Our minimum goal is 5 per year, and that's very low. So I think you could easily do 10 per year, and that would be more of an aspirational goal. That's a great point. Thanks, Emily. Let's see, a couple other ones. The play space, you mentioned the parks. So the idea is not that if we waive the fee for an affordable housing project that there is no park. Basically, it's a commitment, and generally, if you waive a fee, doesn't mean it just goes away. It generally requires, there may be some expenditure on behalf of that. So there is still park investments on a kind of a per capita or per site basis. So the idea is that would probably be covered in some other funding mechanism. So that might come out of the general fund to pay or subsidize for any waived fees. Depends how your city structures its finances. But the idea is, no, we're not going to cut parks. That's not the idea. And let's see, I think you were supportive of the other program. So hopefully that's most of them. And I think between Emily and I, hopefully we covered those, and we'll collect these and incorporate them with the rest of your comments. Appreciate it. Excellent comments.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Commissioner Menes, for always your attention to detail. So thanks. All right, then I have a couple of questions. First of all, a general, it feels like we've made significant progress as far as what the arena requirements are. And so sometimes it feels like, why do we need to be like trying to pull out one rented room so that we can, or one ADU so that we can, actually add, when we actually don't have all that much need. So sometimes it feels a little bit like we're pushing all of these things because the state is requiring things and making it easier for, housing to be built when we actually don't need to be incentivizing all that much. And I'm not sure if that's true. It's just a general feeling that I kind of have. I also noticed that one of the things that when we think about education is who we reach in our education and how we do that. Looking at the survey, I mean, from my point of view, as a person who was a teacher and such, I think you did an excellent job and staff did an excellent job in reaching out and providing opportunities for the community to participate. But when you look at the survey, there were 150 people, and most of them are homeowners who have lived in their homes for more than 20, 30 years. And so it's actually a very small segment of Pinole's population. And when you read comments, people seeing, I'm seeing Pinole becoming more diverse and actually looking at the numbers from the census, it is very diverse. But that's not reflected in how people have engaged with the process. And so I don't know why that is. And I actually don't know, have any ideas at this point how to change that, but how to engage folks who are really needing to more information about the things that we were talking about as far as, education and such like that. So, just a thought as I'm being creative in our education and such that we do. Another thing, so that was program 21, goal 6, those kinds of things there. Another thing, even as a planning commissioner, I get overwhelmed by what are the new state and assembly bills and the housing bills that, we are constrained by and we are also encouraged by. And so, including in our education for the public, what are those bills, and just short little explanations. I mean, there are some things listed in here, SB 9, when we talk about ADUs and such, but including those kinds of things. Another for program 18, and let me get to the page here. That's on page 199. Thinking about place-based improvements, I think we really need to stress this and push this. The non-vacant sites that were suggested are all on San Pablo Avenue. And we have lots of development going on San Pablo, but yet we still do not have the transportation infrastructure. And hopefully with an active transportation plan and, working on complete streets and such like that will happen. But we really need to be proactive in thinking about how we get seniors and, folks who don't have cars into town. So I think even stressing even more on that program 18, the transportation things. I know that was one of the main problems that people have had is, thinking about the Kmart project and how are we going to make Tenant a safe, not Tenant, Fitzgerald a safe corridor. Regarding time reduction, for working on planning. Again, it feels like we're a small town, and I've already heard comments from people who are going through the planning process with single family homes and things like that, that their plans get, pushed down the line. And so I think sometimes if that can be really frustrating for folks. And I'm not really in favor of prioritizing, big projects over just going in the order that they come, especially since we have such a small staff. And I know that those have been, some of those things have been addressed. So yeah, so considering that with that time reduction bit right there. I think those were most of my main comments. Again, how do we do outreach? You have an image, if you look at the survey, that it's an older white community that everyone owns their home. And we know that's not true. So how are we going to reach out to those folks who aren't represented there? So, great.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, and I'll try to again recap quickly, but in terms of the outreach, we tried really hard. We looked at all the agencies and organizations. Typically, to reach those hard to reach populations, we try to work through people that or the organizations that those populations are working with, so the community-based organizations and service providers. I think we did get some of that, but we didn't get the individuals. I feel like our stakeholders, we had stakeholder interviews, and so we tend to get those organizations and community-based organizations there, but we would have liked to get more of the individuals that are using those services, directly responding in the surveys or again participating in workshops. So that's something, it varies from community to community, and it may be an indication that these people are maybe they're too busy. Either they've got other priorities and taking care of work and take care of the family first. So sometimes that happens too. We did try with the stakeholders to try different times of day and things like that. So if you've got some suggestions, that'd be great. And I think particularly with those programs to, again, encourage and promote ongoing education and engagement, that is part of this housing element. And I think we'll always be looking for ways to make that better throughout. If there's any specific examples or suggestions, and it may be a contact or a particular group, please share that with us, because we're very much interested in that. Hear your comments about trying to reflect people who aren't represented in these surveys, or perhaps in the workshops, and it could be again like people without cars, and try and provide those facilities. So maybe I'm just throwing this out there. Maybe there's, because we've seen this in other communities where they have some ride share services and programs, and that may be outside the housing element. So maybe that's something that is being provided, so we can look into that. And so maybe coordinating and referencing those programs if they exist. If they don't, maybe that's something to encourage to assist the people who don't have cars. And let's see, the time reduction, again, I will kind of say, these are programs that we've used, HCD likes to see, and we'll ask for whether you need them or not, frankly. I think one of the programs we've talked about that's not in there is really going back to your affordable housing developers and asking them, because you've been very successful, you've overproduced you've exceeded your arena for the low-income households, but really going back to them and saying, what was it about Pinole that you found to be so attractive and successful? And it may be that, like I say, it's a small community, small city. You probably get that personal attention from your staff, and maybe they found that that's one of the reasons is that it is efficient to develop in Pinole. Maybe those incentives are misplaced and not necessary because you're already doing such a good job. And I think that is one of the points that we are trying to make to HCD is Pinole is doing a lot of things right, just as evidenced overall by how well you've done in terms of meeting and exceeding Eureka already. Did I miss anything? I try to capture all these. But,
No, I think that's good. I mean, I know David Hannum's down here writing and things like that too. So we've got, if one of us doesn't catch it, then the other will. So we should be all right there. Yeah.
good.
Thank you.
These are really good, and they're kind of provoking different thoughts and ideas. That's the idea.
Right.
Thank you.
Do we, at this point, should we ask if there are any public comments?
I would ask if there's
Yeah.
any public comment to the program,
Yeah.
program section.
Yeah, specifically.
Okay. Yeah, there are no public comments right now.
Okay, there we go. Then, so I think we can wrap up that program bit again. I mean, we can make more comments, in the future personally
definitely.
and such like that. So, but again, like Commissioner Current said, this is a really impressive document and it's a very accessible document. So, even for those of us who don't have that real background in it, you've made it very accessible. So thanks for your work in doing that. So let's go ahead and talk specifically now about sites and site choice. And then we can go back to general. And so we can see if we focus on the sites at this point, then where is that coming from? Someone's got that going on. Anyway, so let's focus on sites and then we can go back to general right from there. So let's go ahead and start with Commissioner Menace and then Commissioner Current, and then I'll take a stab at whatever's left. Great.
All right, so basically right now, we're just focusing on Appendix B, pages 205 through 209, right? Okay, so for the sites inventory list, the main question I have is that the slides that you had showed different parcels as being mixed income and above moderate income than page 205 does, and the various other charts throughout the document that show the RHNA sites also show, for example, sites 6, 4, 5, and 3, and 7 as all being above moderate, and site 34, I think, also as being above moderate, though I'm pretty sure with that site's mix, I know it has at least one low income housing as part of the, inclusionary housing requirement, if I'm reading the location of that project right, which I might not be. And also it looks like the sites list cuts out at project 29. So I'm curious as to where we can find out more information about projects 30 through 44, as it were. And that's my questions about those 3 pages.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, the sites 30 through 44. We don't have a page with those listed.
Yeah, it's not on here.
Yeah, there's something missing. Either we put more sites on the map than we should have, or we have not enough on the list. I believe it's the latter, so that may have gotten cut off. We will fix that.
Great, thank you.
And I should just say too, that there will be some modifications again, because with the addition of the Kmart site on Fitzgerald, we're probably going to make some adjustments because we've got an overabundance of sites. That can work to your detriment long term. So we're going to try and resize this appropriately to accommodate the Kmart site, and there'll probably be some of these other sites that may drop off to kind of compensate. the ones that we anticipate and that we probably won't need because we just got over 200 above moderate units. And so some of those bright pink above moderate sites will probably modify in exchange for the Kmart site.
And just to explain to the commission too, is that sometimes when you have sites on for multiple cycles of the housing element, that's why we're talking about removing sites that aren't needed, that they might be needed in the future. If they're counted for now, and let's say the next housing element, then we can't use them for future. We can't use them for future sites. So we need to make really sure that if we have oversights or we have sites that we don't need, that we can pull those off and then use those later on in the next cycles, so that we don't get penalized later on.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. That's helpful. Okay, Commissioner Current.
Yeah, and just continuing the thought process on that is, given the fact that we are in such great shape in providing reaching our RENA requirements, I really don't have any, it's not like the last time we did this where we had to kind of like really use imaginative ways to look for sites. And so I really don't have any comments. I think the comment about reducing the sites would make a lot of sense. We kind of have used the ones that are most obvious, the old Doctors Hospital site, and is certainly something that was so obvious that we're using that. So I would just go and say, reduce the sites, and I don't know what we're going to do in 2030, but I don't know, because Pinole's pretty much, I always thought Pinole was a pretty much built out city, but it always amazes me the imagination of developers to find places to build and how to build, and that I never really thought of. So we'll figure it out. Thank you.
Great. The only thing that I then can add to this is looking at the on page 170, we have the list of non-vacant sites there. And could you explain again that what the requirement is of property owners if they are identified as a potential development site?
Yes, it really doesn't change a property owner's obligations or requirements at all. It does kind of convey some benefit in that there are certain incentives that come along with being identified as a RENA site, particularly over successive housing elements. So if a property owner were to be identified on one or more housing elements as a RENA site, there are state required incentives that if a developer comes in and provides 20% of the units affordable to low income housing, then that has to be approved by right or ministerially. It doesn't go through the normal discretionary process. So that's a pretty significant time and cost savings if the developer can make that pencil at 20%, which is a pretty big if. So that's a benefit that makes that property, it's got an advantage over other properties because of that. But it doesn't require a property owner to change their plans. It doesn't change the zoning. It doesn't change the general plan in that regard. They still retain all the rights that they would have as they exist, even if they weren't identified as a RENA site. So for a property owner, it's only adds the value, really.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think I was, looking at the sites that were identified, and the photographs really help, especially like the Google Maps or the Google Earth photos, so that we can see those. Okay, great. You addressed Pinole Vista. I think I don't have anything else to add either. In terms of, right, just thinking about what we do with sites and making sure we do get the sites listed 30 through 44, that those get added to the report. Other than that, are we missing anything, Mr. Hannum?
No, but I would like to add, there might be a change in the total number of sites and all that. So the site numbers from 39 to 44, those might get changed. And so we'll have a new site. We'll just make sure that the number of sites equals the number,
Right.
the number that's in the table. So we'll make sure of that. So but I'm sure the table, that's all, there's going to be some adjustment to that. So.
Great, thank you. Justin, do we have any public comment?
No, we don't have any comments.
Okay, great. So before we go into the general comments, I'm wondering, as far as I know that you said we wanted to focus on, the programs and the site choice tonight. So I'm wondering how helpful it will be. I'm thinking specifically, I know that Commissioner Menace has got a lot of comments that are good there. What would be the most effective way to share those?
Dan, you want me to go ahead and answer? Actually, if you could, Raphael, if you could type those out for us and get those to me, and then I can forward them to Dan, and then we'll get them answered that way for the general comments for tonight. So before we have the public, I mean, because you'll have another round to make sure that all the comments are answered as part of the actual public hearing process when we get there. So, and I can update you through my reports to make sure that those comments are being updated.
That'd be great. But I do also want to offer you the opportunity, Raphael, if there are some really important ones, like overarching kinds of responses, because in addition to detail, you also have an idea of those big overarching things. So if there's something that you want to address publicly tonight and not through that process, then please.
Yeah, there are a few larger items that I'd like to address. I think that some of it ties into the comments that Chair Moriarty made earlier about the survey. Basically, who was taking the surveys. It was noted. Let me see if I can find the particular questions, because I marked these for comments. So a few things that I noticed was that question 22 showed that 30% had graduated college and 23% had graduated a graduate or professional school, which is much higher than the city of Pinole's overall education rate as a whole. Question 23, in terms of racial background, note that about 50% of respondents consider themselves to be white or Caucasian, which again is significantly higher than the city's percentage of white population as a whole. But the more concerning parts were question 26 on page 241 and question 30 on page 244, discussing which languages would be helpful in terms of translation services and what the primary languages are in your household. And I noted that nobody at all replied that a translator for Tagalog would be helpful, and nobody at all replied that Tagalog was a primary or secondary language spoken in their household, which implies that the survey completely failed to reach the city of Pinole's significant Filipino population. And I think that's a considerable problem. I think the city should do more outreach to Filipino community groups and leaders in the Filipino community, like, say, Cameron Society, for example. And let's see. There were some other things that I flagged as being higher priority. Let me find them, because I have a lot of other questions that, you're right, are more in the nature of minutia. that don't need to be addressed right now, but there are some that should be. So I guess another one of my major questions. I guess there's one question that's important right now because it potentially ties into actions that the city council is going to be taking at its November 1st meeting when it considers the historic preservation overlay district, which got continued from its last meeting. The housing element update review of past accomplishments, apply design review guidelines, H2.1, page 9, talking about basically setting up objective design standards and making sure that design guidelines and findings are objective. So how does that interact with the creation of a historic preservation overlay district, given that at least some of the categorization for what's considered historic and so on is going to be less objective just by the nature of it. For rehabilitation assistance, H2.3 on the next page, page 10, it talks a lot about exploring funding availability and improving public awareness, but I'm not sure, are there metrics for us knowing whether the subsidies were actually used in the community? Can we track that? Are we allowed to track it? I've got questions about why the accessible units for the physically disabled element was removed rather than continued, but that's more of a details thing, I guess. There's a few cases on page 21, for example, where the projected housing needs and the regional housing needs assessment are broken out into extremely low as well as very low. But in other areas, it's just noted as very low. The city isn't, it's only required to provide housing for very low and not separately for extremely low, right?
Well, I mean, like Dan said earlier, all usually extremely low, very low, and low are usually lumped into one category as low income. And so, but as projects, you know, we strive to try to get projects like, say, Pinole Vista, where they're doing 13 low, 14 very low. So we try to break those into the groups that when we can, but normally those three are kind of like lumped together. Dan, if you want to answer that as well, if I missed something on that.
No, I think that's right. And I think just to say there are some incentives, particularly that and kind of programs oriented to encourage more of that very low or extremely low income, because those are the hardest ones to get. So again, the state density bonus, there's formulas. So the lower you go and the more you provide, the more bonus you get. One of the programs is potentially looking at additional bonuses above the state requirements if and when a developer kind of meets those specific needs in Pinole. So there's some programs there to investigate that further.
And similarly, like Vista Woods, I mean, Vista Woods had an 80% density bonus because they met all the thresholds that were needed for, you know, for the transit, for 100% affordability for low income seniors. So that's what Dan's saying, that usually there'll be density bonuses that would be given as part of that so that the developer can make up some of those costs.
Okay, I was more thinking about it with regards to the regional housing needs assessment requirements, because I noted that, you know, some of that's flagged as being moderate, low, very low.
Raphael, if I can make a comment here about the extremely low, I think this kind of is the train of thought I had about how the running of rooms. I think that a lot of extremely low people will be renting rooms from houses or they may be out in the streets. But I think the the best way to address the extremely low individuals, not necessarily families, is in the in the renting out of rooms and other in residences.
Okay, so then on page 48, one thing that caught my attention was the city apparently as part of a sale contract decided to de-restrict a considerable number of senior beds. And I was curious, though I think this may be more a question for staff as to why the city decided to get rid of 6 very low income units, essentially speaking, at 31 moderate income units, because that was a deliberate choice the city made. It seems like it can't go back on it now because that was a contract agreement.
Well, in most cases, the caveat, when a developer has an affordable housing agreement, you usually have a caveat of how many years that they have the ability to, whether it's 35 years, 45, 55 years. When those developments reach those thresholds, then it's recognized that they've met their housing affordability as part of their contract. And they can, I mean, the city can try to work with them to maintain those. However, the developer or the owner of the property has the ability to then revert back to above market rate because they fulfilled their contractual obligation of affordability through the housing affordability agreement. And correct me if I'm wrong there, Dan, but I think that's how come you'll see like we're losing units in a sense, those particular units because they've met their threshold in terms of contractual obligation to the affordable housing agreement.
Right. That's exactly right. We call those at risk. So if you look at that table 30, we keep track of them because they're under contract. And the idea is to try to know when those are due and coming up so that there is an opportunity to kind of renegotiate, see if we can extend that affordability period.
I think what's confusing me there is it says, at that time, a new affordable housing covenant was recorded on the property, which permitted the owner to reduce the number of very low income beds by 1 each year. Moderate income beds are phased out at a maximum rate of 6 per year. So it sounds like there was a new covenant put in place that was essentially designed to dismantle itself over 6 years or so, rather than the old covenant expiring. So I was wondering why the city agreed to do that.
Probably in some cases, and I'll have to, I mean, I don't know which agreement, so this is just an assumption based on my point, on my guess here, is that they fulfilled their requirement as part of their contractual agreement. And through these other types of agreements, they might have extended for a certain amount of years. And out of those years, they get 2 more units back, then they get 3 more units back, then they get 4 units back as part of extension. So that's probably my guess. However, I don't know exactly how that works. But I know in some of the cities I've worked in, we've done that with some of the affordable housing places that have provided units for 35 years, and we've asked them to maintain, and we've entered into agreements to allow them to get some of the units back over the course of the next few years, so that then they get their market rate. They go back to market rate units. So I'm not sure what agreements the city's had with these particular projects.
Yeah, David, I think you're exactly right. It looks like it was expiring on 2018. So effectively you got another 10 years out of it, but it's kind of, amortizing over that 10 years. So they're getting those units back a little bit at a time over 10 years. So it's a phase out effectively, but probably better than just losing it entirely in 2018.
Okay. I guess my next question is, a lot of the tables have comprehensive housing affordability strategy question data from 2014 to 2018. I was wondering if you knew when more recent data would become available, because I expect particularly with regards to Table 52, cost burden and severe cost burden for households with income less than 30% of the particular methodology that they used, that might have been affected by COVID, the rent freezes, or the lack thereof after those expired, and so on. As page 70 shows some pretty stark numbers. Like based on 2018 HUD CHAS data, an estimated 40 extremely low income households in Pinole lack complete plumbing or kitchen facilities. However, many of those households may live in units without complete kitchens, but who receive provided meals. Well, did those provided meals continue during the pandemic? That sort of question.
Yeah, generally, we've got a lot of different data sources. They're not all right up to 2021, 2022. So we have updated as much as we can to get the most recent stuff. Yeah, I wish we had more current, but that's what we've got right now. It's what's available to us. You'll see that throughout the document that there's some maps that have ranges between 2010, 2014, and then 2015 through 2019 or 2020. That's just the data that's available to us. So we do the best we can with that.
All right, on page 92, permit processing time. I noted that it says program 5 includes reviewing and updating as necessary the EIR prepared for the general plan. Specific plans of individual projects could use it for their environmental documentation and not have to prepare individual studies and reports. Wouldn't that already basically be allowed by the infill process like we saw with the K-Bar project and the Vista Woods project? I think it was the one that replaced the Doctor's Hospital. A lot of their EIR stuff seemed to be covered by the infill rule. Or are there more changes that still need to be made even above that?
There's usually, I'll have to. In most cases, I mean, when projects come in, we look at what environmental clearances we can do as part of the overall with the general plan and in the specific plan. So with this, by adding some residential design guidelines and updating those, there are other options, there are other items that we could exempt projects using as long as they're consistent with our general plan and our specific plan. And so it allows us to do that. And that's pretty much because when your environmental document runs out, such as like our EIR right now is like 10 years old, 12 years old, then we have to use individual environmental documents to cover. However, when we upgrade, like with this, we're going to upgrade with mitigated, we're tearing off of the old environmental document. And so it'll allow us again to, now we've got more current data, we've got more current environmental information. It'll allow us to use that to tier off projects that come through the process. So that's kind of how that works.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
So I guess if you folks have more comments on that particular item, then you can go ahead and say that because I'm about to move on to something else.
Good deal.
Okay, so then moving on to page 113, figure number 16, showing racial and ethnic majority 2010 and figure 17% non-white 2018. I'm not sure whether the choice of the 2010 map is supposed to be like that to show the change over time, or whether it was just the only map you had access to, but it seems a little bit confusing having the different styles of map design, basically, between the two different charts. I know there's one chart where it seemed like it was done better. Let me see if I can find it. There was one where you had two charts side by side. Oh yeah, on page 119, you had figure 22, poverty status 2010 through 2014 and 2015 through 2019. And there you had the same sort of coloring for the two different maps, and you had them right side by side. So that seemed like it was helpful. And then
Yeah, I'll just answer that quickly. These come directly from the state. There's HCD, AFFH data viewer. And so we pull in their data directly. And particularly because HCD is reviewing these, we're kind of, we don't want to change the colorations and things like that. They're used to seeing orange versus blue versus green. And so I kind of agree. Some of these things look like they're not the most beautiful maps. But again, we're trying to show them using the same legends effectively that from the source data directly from HCD.
sure. And this also ties into a somewhat broader concern of mine, because you can see in these maps that the percentage of white population, effectively speaking, like you can see at figure 17, and the percentage of low to moderate income population, again, in figure 20, you could see that on page 117, again, is higher in Pinole Valley in both cases, even if the data is a little bit outdated. But I noticed that the regional housing needs assessment sites that are flagged for development in Pinole Valley were all marked as being above moderate in all of the charts that show up in this draft document. But in your slides, some of them were showed as being mixed. So I was curious as to which one of those was accurate, because if you've got all of the developments in a wealthier and wider part of town being the above moderate income developments, that seems like it's not necessarily working towards affirmatively furthering fair housing, as it were.
Yeah, you're right. We're looking for a distribution of sites throughout town, particularly what HCD is going to be looking for is to see that those lower income categories and on the map.
You went out, Dan.
Oh, sorry. I hit the mute. So yeah, we're looking for a distribution throughout, and HCD is particularly looking for those green sites, the lower income categories in the high resource areas. So there's other maps that will start to rank, where there's better environment or educational access or economic opportunity. And HCD is going to look for that. And then likewise, some of these sites again are what's available based on your zoning. Some of these are pending sites. So they kind of reflect, what we have in the hopper. A lot of it comes down to where do you have your higher density zoning, and that typically relates to the older areas of the city, areas with transit and access to service and employment. So those are all critical to affordable housing, trying to have those things in close proximity so that we can reduce transportation costs and the need for a car, ideally, or at least reducing transportation costs overall. So we are looking for a mix there. If you know of some other sites that we've missed that would particularly help that equation, that's very helpful. We went through, ourselves multiple times, and then also with staff, and David and Lily and Justin to really kind of fine comb through these. Again, there will be some modifications because of the addition of that Kmart site. And so there will be some adjustments here too. You'll see these sites adjust a bit for that.
Sure. And I guess I should note that technically speaking, by the term racially concentrated areas of affluence, there isn't anywhere in Pinole that strictly speaking qualifies per figure 30 on page 127. But I do think that the existing charts that we have, between figure 20 on page 117 and figure 17 on page 114 are sufficient to indicate at least a trend in that direction, even if it doesn't reach the level of triggering the particular requirement that the state has.
Raphael, if I may interject here, I remember reading an article in the newspaper a couple of months ago about how they looked at all the jurisdictions within the Bay Area. And I think Pinole, I could be wrong in this, but it was definitely in the top 10. But I think Pinole was recognized as the second most diverse city in the Bay Area. So I think this is another time where we have to sit back like we did with providing housing, where we have to say that we've accomplished a lot in this city as far as diversity goes. And I think we should recognize that.
Sure. I'm not saying that Pinole is not a diverse city, like even comparing the charts. And I guess that is one benefit of figure 16, comparing figure 16 to figure 17, you can see a significant change in terms of diversity, even over just 10 years. But at the same time, I note that if HCD favors having, for example, lower income or at least mixed developments in higher resource white areas. I mean, you can see, look at figure 34, for example, on page 132, the sort of TCHC composite score. You can see that it's higher for that region than it is for the rest of the city. Likewise for the environmental score, so on and so forth. You can go down a whole list of things like it's not a huge difference like it might have been in the past, but it's still a noticeable difference based on past trends in development, which is exactly the sort of thing that affirmatively furthering fair housing is supposed to look at and address. Past structures of development and segregation that linger into the present. So that's why I wanted to highlight that particular color.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, but I mean, if you're concerned about HDD commenting about the diversity of Pinole, I think they have probably about 1,000 other cities in the state that they're going to be focusing on. If you're concerned about HCD not approving the housing element because of that, I've never seen that be a real issue.
I'm just saying that looking at patterns, that's a pattern that jumps out to me, just looking at it. But there was one other thing in particular that I wanted to highlight before we finished up here. And let's see if I can find the exact table, because I know that I marked this. I actually found it. Ah, yes. So on page 168, we have table 79, housing capacity. And I'm looking in particular here at the very low housing capacity, because we already know that we've met the above moderate requirements. We've met the low income requirements. We haven't quite met moderate yet, but I don't think moderate's going to be a huge issue. The problem is very low. Because for very low, if you look at that table in particular, you have the requirement 121 units, the total requirements with the 20% buffer 145 units. And then you have pending projects 36. Even if you add in the Kmart project 17, that still gets you up to what, 53 out of 145. And then you've got 7 units and ADUs, which I guess would be the room share thing you're talking about, or just building out ADUs. And then you have vacant site capacity of 39 and non-vacant site capacity of 68. And that's if you have no low income units eating up some of that capacity, like you saw with the Kmart site. I'm not sure how realistic that is as an expectation, because I don't think the city's inclusionary housing ordinance allows for simply requiring that all of the affordable housing be very low income. So I'm not sure how feasible the vacant site capacity value of 39 and the non-vacant site capacity value of 68 actually is. And if those aren't feasible, that's a problem, because our total surplus there is just 5 units. So it seems like that's a potential major problem. And that's been something I've been talking about a few times when we talk about this, because we're doing great with low income. We're doing great with above moderate. We're doing okay with moderate. I'm just not sure how realistic our very low projections are. And that seems like it would be a major issue if it turns out they're not realistic, because it's going to be harder to get very low units than it is to get pretty much any other kind of unit. Like elsewhere in this document, I forget the exact page, but they talk about how, for example, Saha has more very low units than average, say like 23. And that required a few $1 million of city funding for redevelopment funds to be able to make that possible. Because otherwise you just have low double-digit values of very low housing, even for multi-100 unit developments like the Kmart site, or even like the 100% affordable Vista Woods site. That still had, I believe, under 20 units of very low affordable housing. So I'm just not sure how realistic table 79 is. And if table 79 isn't realistic, then I think we've got problems.
This is where perhaps the idea of that Commissioner Current had spoken of getting credit for the ideas of what's happening with rentals within, houses to outside family members and things like that. But if you guys want to address that in particular, go for it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, our 15% inclusionary does cover 60%. It doesn't cover for wrong, 60% or 40% low, 60% very low. Is that what it is?
Other way around, I think.
Or 60 low, 40% very low. Yeah, okay. So we do have that component as part of our projects. But yeah, I'll have to refer to Dan on some of these tables and that and how we get there from here. But unless we're just combining all the, the 121 plus the 68, I mean, how are we going to get to that very low?
Yeah, because ultimately it ties in, and I guess this loops back to something I wanted to mention right at the start, but we were only talking about programs then. It ties into table 84 and especially program number 1, the quantified objective, as you know, provide adequate size to accommodate the city's entire RHNA allocation of 500 units, no net loss of capacity below the requirement during the planning period. And then table 84 back on page 185 says, the city expects to have in new construction 60 units of extremely low income and 61 units of very low income. And, based on the experience of the Kmart project, where, you got 17 units for a 200 unit project, that would be.
Well, we have 27 units.
Right. But for the low income.
It's 14. It's 14 for the
14 and 13.
14 and 13. Yeah.
Right. So 14, not 17. I erred a bit on the high side then. So if you want to get to 121, you would need 1,600 units, I think, at that ratio. And that seems like way more than the city's planning on building.
Well, unless the project is, this is kind of, if the project comes in and builds and they want to do very low income, that's where the density bonus kicks in. So there's a lot of, this is kind of the dice we roll with affordable housing is who's going to come in and build it and what they're going to build. So, and I think these are, and I'll refer to Dan on this one as well. But I just think that we could get a project. We didn't know we were going to get 600 units in a year. I mean, that came out of the blue. So who's to know that in year five we get another, 121 of very low income. But I think based on what they're trying to show is a breakout of how we could get there. I mean, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong on that. Or
yeah, that's right. We're trying to set some goals, and these may be aspirational, but again, that's what the collection of the programs that we're trying to do is trying to again emphasize and focus particularly on those very low units. Those are the hardest ones. They require the greatest subsidies, and again, you've had some pretty good production with those as well. Maybe not meeting the total RENA here, but you've made some good progress already, and we haven't even started the 8-year process yet. So with additional promotion and these other programs, I think we've got a reasonable chance at doing that. I think we can change the numbers, but these numbers here in table 24 are really trying to reflect your RENA. That is your RENA there. 500 units. So we were saying, hey, our goal is to meet the RENA from extremely very low, moderate, and above moderate. So that's what that table is doing. The programs are, collectively intended to get us there, and no individual program is going to do it. I think it is going to be a combination of all of them to get you there. But I think the example of what you've been doing in just the last few years. If we can, continue and build off that, I think you're going to be in very good shape. Particularly if you compare what you've done versus other cities, you're looking really good. So few cities ever really meet their RENA, and you've already exceeded some of your RENA categories. So that's to be commended.
All right, well, that's all of my major comments at this point. So I'll submit some of my more minor questions to Dave in writing.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Menes. I think that's it then for this update, correct?
Yes.
We're good to go. Thank you so much, Dan and Emily, for your work and for, sitting through with this, especially at this time. So we appreciate, that work and know that, I mean, it's a business, but yet you've done a really great job. So we look forward to the finished project.
Great, thank you. It's really appreciate those comments and like to hear that it's as intended, try to make it user friendly and accessible. That's a lot of dense material, but try to make it readable and approachable. And the fact that you guys have gone through the effort to really read it, makes us very happy. Thank you.
And before we close out on this project, I would, I say this agenda item, I would like to, include a program 23 to encourage the development of housing for teachers and school employees on school sites. Where we would work with the school district and private schools to identify opportunities for financing and construction of housing for teachers and school district employees, because I think that would be something I would really like to see in this document. And the other thing is that since Raphael had brought up the point that I missed about program number 10 about developing a room sharing program for seniors, I was wondering if we should maybe expand that to any, maybe focusing on seniors, but opportunities for non-seniors to get housing, because as Ann pointed out, that's a way of satisfying the housing requirements for extremely low income people, and something that we can maybe track and strengthen our housing element. So just those two items. Otherwise, as you point out, really great document. So thank you.
Okay, then with that, let's go ahead and bring this down to the city planners and commissioners report.
All right. So we'll go ahead. Just to let you know, we'll be seeing some more construction on the Appian Way site. So they are starting the process and the demo permit. They've gotten all the requirements for that. So you'll start to see some movement on that property. We're working, I just reviewed the Pinole Shores 2 project for review of completeness, which they've now completed. And so, of course, we're moving forward on the review of that project as well. So hopefully we'll get that project to you here in the next few months. We're working on the environmental as well. So everything's moving forward on that one. As you're aware, the council approved the Pinole Vista project at their October 18th meeting. So we're working with them to get things moving. We're also working on the affordable housing agreements for BCRE and Appian Village and getting those to the council here in the next couple of meetings. So getting those wrapped up. And then we are in the process of developing our objective development standards. We're working on those. We've hired a consultant to kind of put them all together and start, putting together some of that for us. And so we'll be carrying those over through all of our, once we get that draft and do all that, we'll probably be carrying those over to all of our documents that we're going to need to do to make those objective standards. And then we're working on the final map for the Dollywall project on Hazel. So we're getting that finished up, and we're also working on finishing up the two housing projects on Tenant, the one at 612 Tenant and one at 600 Tenant, which is the old Blackies that Dollywall was bought with 2279 Park Street. So we're working on those projects as well. So there's a lot of stuff still in the hopper, and of course a lot of stuff to work with the housing element. So, and the other elements that we'll be working on as well. So with that, that's all I have, unless you have any questions or anything I can answer.
No questions.
Jen, on the previous item, do we need to take any action or do you just take notes and send them along?
For this,
No, oh yeah, for the housing element.
yeah, we'll take the notes and we'll pass them on. We'll be working with Dan and Emily to get those all inclusive in the document.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't need to take a vote or anything.
Yeah, no, there's no vote, there's vote needed on it.
Then I did want to, there was one thing we wanted to address with the design guidelines, the old, the OTDG, the Old Town Design Guidelines. There's just been a lot of confusion, I think, in the community regarding what the process is
Right.
and where things are. So I asked Alex for a summary just to read out. And obviously, since Erica can't stream Alex, I'll just go ahead and read what he said, just
Okay.
for the record,
Yeah, that's fine.
so that we've got it here.
Sure.
He said the draft ordinance and design guidelines were considered by the planning commission, which recommended approval to the city council with certain changes. And this happened in April, I believe, of
21. Yes.
Right. So the city council considered the draft ordinance and design guidelines and appointed a special committee to review the items in more depth before the items were further considered by the city council. The process does not involve further consideration by the planning commission as an entity. The committee met and requested staff make certain changes to the documents. The direction at the last committee meeting was that the updated documents could be shared with the committee by email, with members providing feedback to staff over email and staff scheduling a meeting only if needed. This part of the process got truncated because of the timing, and I apologize for that. I know we had one committee member who was really concerned that step was missed.
Right.
In order to ensure that there was still an opportunity for feedback from the committee and public, the design guidelines were not agendized to be adopted at the first reading of the historic preservation overlay ordinance. So in parentheses, all ordinances require a first and second reading at 2 different meetings. So the first reading of the ordinance will also be an opportunity for the council to review the design guidelines and receive additional input from the public. The design guidelines will be scheduled to be adopted at a later meeting unless the city council provides direction for a different process. And so those were to be discussed this week, but it got continued to, I'm sorry, last week.
Yeah.
It was continued to the November 1st city council meeting. So if you have comments and thoughts to make, I know that everyone's been noticed. And do they have to be re-noticed about the change in date?
Probably not, because they made that change at a meeting. So, I mean, we'll probably be noticing as we do our normal noticing processes. I don't think there's any additional noticing that will be done, but I'd have to check with Alex. But usually it's like when you continue an item, you don't have to go out and re-notice everything because it's under a notice. I think this falls under that as well, since they continued the item. Yeah.
Right.
My
Okay.
recollection of the meeting, that was what they did. They explicitly continued the items to make sure they didn't need to do renoticing.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So anyway, just to make sure that that is in the minutes and that's clarified. I don't have anything else. Commissioner Current?
Yes, I just have a question about, we are working on the housing element right now, and the schedule for that is to be completed by May, but my understanding is that we're still looking at a general plan update that was going to be implemented in the spring of next year. And I was wondering if that's still on the docket, or is that going to be stretched out?
No, it's still on the docket for next year. I mean, that's the environmental justice element, the creation of the environmental and justice element, as well as the update of the safety element. It's just the housing element is taking precedent at this point. So,
course.
and so that's why we're moving forward, but they are working on those elements. We just haven't seen the drafts for those, but we're continuing to work on those as well. So probably you'll see something, hopefully sometime in the beginning of next year, 2023 with the other elements. But I can check on this. I can check on the timing on that just to make sure we're all.
Yeah, I bring that up because we already have one vacancy on the commission, and I don't know whose terms are expiring in April, but it might be a good thing to go after any general plan updates with the new commission, the new commissioners on board, so we don't have a discontinuity.
Right.
Okay. And also, David, as I sent you an email about how on Nextdoor there was a thread concerning the construction of or the reconstruction of the old Valero gas station at Fitzgerald and Sarah, where they're really concerned about the setbacks, and I think they also did mention that the housing on San Pablo there, the senior housing, also has very little setbacks too. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and in case that becomes an issue. I know that when we approved those projects, we did look at the setbacks, and they followed this building code. But I just kind of want like you to be aware of the fact that there may be, I know it's kind of died out, but that there may be something about that coming up.
Yeah, and just to let you know, I mean, some of the construction fencing is, I mean, it's kind of where that is. It kind of, it kind of distorts kind of where the actual setback is, because depending on where the property lines are and the setbacks of the buildings and all that. So, but we're definitely making sure on the backside on the that's the Encina side, because there was some setbacks. They brought the building back as well as the separation between the buildings. So we'll make sure that they fall within the setbacks. So in terms of the Valero, and we'll take a look at the Valero. I don't know what's going on at that. Justin, you know what's going on at the Valero? If there's anything going on at the Valero?
Yeah, so they do have their building permit issued. We did review it for setbacks when we brought it to planning commission before, so it should comply with the plans that they submitted for their building permit application. We'll double check just to make sure, but yeah, since we issued the building permit, it should comply with all setbacks applicable to that zoning district.
That's all I had.
Okay, then with that, we have our next meeting.
Frankie has his hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Frankie.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Golly, all right, good.
This would be related to the discussion regarding the overlay. And just as an example, from our last meeting that we had with the subcommittee that was reviewing the overlay, it was my understanding that staff would be working on an updated version of the document based upon the many changes that we discussed, right? And so when I did just a quick overview of the hundreds of pages in that document, I found a few instances where some of the changes that we asked for didn't make it into that document. So I want to ask that what is the best process to ensure that the changes that we asked for are included in that document?
That they're included before they go to city council on November 1st?
Correct.
Best thing would be to get them to staff as quickly as possible. You can send them directly to Alex or to me to get those in. So yeah, so that we can make sure we get all those comments.
Okay, thank you a million for that opportunity. And that's all I had, T. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie, and thanks for following through with that and getting all those details there. That's been frustration.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Take care now.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, Chair. I do note that there's someone with a hand raised online if you wanted to take that question. It is at the end of the meeting and after public comments are typically taken.
I have no objection.
Yeah, let's go. Okay, we can go ahead, but let's put a time limit of 3 minutes on that, please. Just because it is after the public comment period.
Okay, callers from the number ending in 5748. And you are allowed to speak. Please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, this, I believe, was related to the last agenda item. Not so much public comment, it's kind of a two-part question. With regard to the fair housing or the low-income housing crisis that might face the city of Pinole in the near future or not too distant future. Is the Appian Way project, is that considered the Safeway Tara Hills build-out project pretty much a closed book deal? Because originally that was supposed to have housing built in with the new Safeway Albertsons anchor store. And I would suggest or recommend that for topic of discussion and planning for the future, that you might want to revisit that to see if there's any way possible that we can get Safeway Albertsons and the landlord to agree to add some housing, because that's a huge piece of property there. And it seems to be going to a lot of waste, and it's down in the canyon, so it's not going to be like a giant Salesforce skyscraper or something like that. And we need housing. And so that being said, to add to that, I'm surprised nobody mentioned that Kroger is in the process of buying or merging with the tendered an offer for the Safeway Albertsons chain, and that's a huge, big acquisition. So if Kroger buys Albertsons Safeway chain, does that mean they have an out to either pull out of the deal or amend the deal moving forward with that project? Because I can see a possibility of one, if not both of those things happening. And then lastly speaking, the vacant housing in Pinole is an issue. And I would ask the city of Pinole, the task force, what's going on with the vacant caretaker's house. That's a 6-bedroom house there. We're losing about $2,000 a month in income, and we could be renting that house out. Now, they said they can't sell it, but it might turn into another Faria house fiasco if we don't get that addressed. And the city manager, Murray, said about 4 or 5 months ago, he would have an answer to that question in 2 or 3 months. And it's long past 2 or 3 months, and nobody said boo about that big empty caretaker's house that's getting dilapidated. They have wild old brush and weeds and trees and things growing in the front yard, the side yard, and dead trees all around it that could go up in smoke. And then we lose that asset to the city, as well as not being able to maintain it and rent it out. Thank you.
Great, perfect timing there. So the three things were the Appian Way project and the Safeway project.
Right.
And then if we know anything, if this Kroger acquisition will affect that Safeway project. And then finally, the caretaker's house, is this the one out by the dog park?
That's what I'm thinking where it's at.
Yeah.
That I'll answer that one first because I know the least about that one. So that'll have to be referred back to the city council. I'm not sure where we are with that and where that's going. So if city manager Murray was supposed to get back to him, then I'm assuming they're working on it to get that question answered. Regarding the Pinole Square project, at this point, and I'll answer 1 and 2 kind of at the same time with the Krogers. We're not quite sure what's going to happen with the Kroger, that merger and where we're going. As of now, we know that Safeway is negotiating that lease with Hillsborough Property, the current owner. Right now, we do know that there is a potential owner for that property. I think there's a potential sale of the property that's going on. I'm not too sure. I don't have all the details on it, but there is to a more of a commercial broker that they're working with. So, but we do know that the project has until next July to pull a permit to activate their entitlements. So, or August, I think it's July or August, at which point, if they don't, then then all the entitlements go away. And so, which means that depending on what happens with Safeway and all that, and the new property owner will all have to have new entitlements. Just to kind of explain the overlay, what happened was when that project got originally approved, yes, there was a high density overlay. There was a commitment of about 125 housing units on that property. However, because of the buffer zone, because of the available sites that were available and the buffer that the city had, we basically took that site and took it out of our buffer, so to speak. And so we didn't lose any affordable housing because of that project. We just used the excess buffer that we talked about with the last housing element. We lost units out of that because we had 200, our last RENA numbers were 297 units. We had a buffer of about 400 up to 435, 436. And so we basically kind of took that site out of our buffer. And it didn't really affect our RENA numbers. So there was a finding made by the council at their meeting that made that happen. So but so as of right now, the entitlements are what the entitlements are that were approved by the council, which is the approval of the Safeway with the shop buildings and the junior anchor with the gas station and a drive-through site. However, come July, August next year, there could be a whole nother project, or they could start building that project. So,
and David, if I could add on to that, we had brought up about having housing in the Appian Square or the Pinole Square, and the developer and Safeway specifically said they do not want that. Right. I still think that there might be a possibility for the other stores that are to the east of the new Safeway. But as we pointed out during our discussion about the housing element, is that we are more than exceeding our requirements, and there's no sense to actually play all our cards at one time. And if we can keep it in the back of our mind about there being a possibility of housing there, but we should not memorialize that in the housing element.
yeah, I mean, it is a site. I mean, there is potential there on the 2 acres because remember, Pinole Square is just 11.89 acres. There's actually 12.7 acres that makes up that entire, what we're calling Pinole Square. Hillsborough property has control of 11.89 of those acres. So there's another acre or so within the project area that if the property owner wanted to put some housing there, there's an ability to do that. But we haven't had any proposals to do that, and I haven't seen any, and I haven't talked to anybody that is looking to do that. So.
Great, thank you for that explanation. So, with that then our next regular meeting is scheduled for November 14th at 7 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
All right.